if we would have a tick sitting on us, that would be the size of a guinea pig, piercing through your skin and start to eat on your liver. Other bees eventually will figure that out. There's a weak colony, and then they initiate literally a robbery. It's like a bank robbery. They're going to take all the honey that they have, fly back home, but while they're collecting the honey, they're also collecting these pathogens. They're getting infected with the bacteria, they're getting potentially infected with the mite, and now they're bringing the mite back home, right? And now you have literally like what I call your ticking time bomb. You know, it's just exploding because you infected maybe 20 other hives.
We have a very special guest, Dr. Jörg Mayer, and he is a bee veterinarian. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be on your podcast. Clarification, I guess, from the beginning. I'm a veterinarian and I work with bees, but bees are just a certain percentage of what I do. A few years ago, actually, as of January 1st, 2017, the Food and Drug Administration here in the States, actually, they prohibited the sale of antibiotics over the counter to beekeepers because they finally figured out that bees are a food-producing animal and they should be held to the same standard as a cow, as a chicken, as a pig. At that time, it became clear to me that if you take that away from them, and now they need a prescription for it, for food-producing animal, what a lot of times here it's called a veterinary feed directive, which is more or less the same than a prescription. So veterinarians have to be more involved in the future. And since I work at the university, I thought, well, the next logical step is that somebody has to educate those veterinarians. The university has been extremely supportive of that. And here we are, we're offering courses. I get them introduced into the world of bee medicine, start out with being a beekeeper in their first year. So we have a teaching apiary, 12 hives, and we have a treatment crew. So they're really doing the hands-on stuff. They're responsible for those animals. We talk about different forms of treatments, how to keep an animal like the superorganism beehive, how to keep them happy, well-fed during dearth, just like what a farmer does. How do I take really optimum care of my girls in the hive? And in their fourth year, they're really good at what they're doing with bees. So I'm very proud of that program.
So cool. So if you are a beekeeper and your hives are not making it, what would be the steps to try to troubleshoot what happened? Can you run any diagnostics? Can you send the dead bees off to a laboratory? Can you have someone assist you with a hive autopsy to figure out what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a certain infrastructure in place for this. I always say numbers are king, right? The more numbers you can collect, the more data you can collect, the better we have an idea. So one of the national data collection that's happening is something called Bee Informed Partnership. And they just recently finished a yearly census. It's an online survey where they ask beekeepers from all over the United States to report their losses. This is how we know about these numbers, because that gets published online too, and they can actually potentially identify hotspots, right? Oh, this state, you know, on average experience 40% loss. This state potentially. So there's some national data collection, but I always say be an active partner in your local community. So if you're a beekeeper, join your local beekeepers association, because if you potentially have a loss of 40% in your hives, you know, talk amongst yourself. Is everybody in your club reporting similar numbers? Or if literally everybody says, I don't know what you're talking about, I got 100% through the winter, I got everything is fine. Well, maybe this is a local event, right? So maybe your bees are maybe kept next to a farm and they suddenly spray. So it's a very local individual case. But if everybody reports back like, no, welcome to the club. Yep, that's what we experience as well, right? So then you know it's a more general problem. And then you troubleshoot, right? You learn. There's always mentors and clubs available, right? There's people that have been doing it for 40 years. Fountain of knowledge, right? So we can always learn from our more experienced friends and beekeepers, and because they have seen it all. And then have science, you know, have science integrated, read the papers, see what's the latest national trend, And then, yes, there's actually laboratories available that if you're really worried that somebody poisoned your bees or something like this, you can actually send samples into national laboratory and they can analyze them for common pesticides and other materials that potentially really, really harm the girls.
Maybe they didn't have enough food through the winter, like starvation. Maybe it was varroa mite. Maybe it was a bacterial infection, or a combination of all of these factors, pesticides, not having diverse enough food. Can they call up a bee veterinarian to come and look at their hive?
Yeah, there is actually starting to slowly but surely, like I said, veterinarians need now legally to be involved in this. It's a fairly new concept, but there is the Honeybee Health Coalition, which is formed. And the whole idea is that this is a coalition also of veterinarians that are interested, that would be willing to go out and do a farm call, to do a house call. You just have to assess the situation. You have to be there where the beehives are, and then examine a couple of frames and look for the potential problem, try to diagnose what's coming up. So yes, there is infrastructure available that you can look online, and then you can look according to your state, put your zip code in, and see if there's veterinarians that registered themselves. Yes, I'm willing to come out. The number obviously is growing as more and more veterinarians enjoy working with bees, get educated working with bees. And so that whole infrastructure, though, needs to be established. But this is what we're currently working on multiple fronts.
Some places still don't have a bee veterinarian. Is there like a phone number that they can call to get like a Zoom consult or something like that, so that they can...
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. So, for example, this varies from state to state according to the state veterinary medical association. So, in my state here, where I live, Georgia, they're very clear that to establish that client-patient relationship, that doctor-patient relationship, that a Zoom call would not be an adequate form of establishing that. So there needs to be, at least initially to initiate it, there needs to be a face-to-face meeting. So, ideally the veterinarian would go to visit the beekeeper or the bee farmer. If that doesn't work, a compromise would be that maybe the beekeeper brings a couple of affected frames from affected brood, to the clinic and say, look, this is what it looks like. And then the veterinarian can examine those frames, hopefully comes to the same conclusion. Yes, this is something that we can treat with antibiotics. And or then the owner of the beehives can potentially provide digital evidence, like a picture of the setup, how many hives they have. So I think this would be a good compromise. So one of those two things has to happen, but just doing everything over Zoom, at least in Georgia, is not considered adequate. But follow up potentially, calling in. Yeah.
As veterinarians, you're not licensed to treat animals that are not actually in your province or in your state. The veterinary boards don't allow that. So a little bit of red tape. It's funny you said consult the Beekeepers Association. It's the literal hive mind. First meeting of the season was all about collecting data from your hive. So how to get the numbers so that you can notice when something is changing.
It is so important. And so there's also another saying, that all beekeeping is local. So for example, I used to live in Boston for a long time, and then before I moved down to Georgia. And beekeeping in Boston is very, very different than beekeeping in Georgia. So if you relocate, I would learn here in Georgia, and then I moved to Saskatchewan, and I think I understand bees. Like, oh wow, no, I have to relearn everything, right? So I'm going to go probably join these meetings, because they will let you know, when is the dearth, when do I need to feed the bees, when is the nectar flow the best, what kind of pressures do we have from an environment or from a pathogen. So this is all stuff that you need to learn locally. Absolutely. So no book can help you out. I mean, a book can prepare you, the fundamentals and everything, but in order to keep the girls alive, you need to talk to local bee farmers. Yeah.
That's so interesting. A lot of people just getting into beekeeping, they can just go and order bees off the internet. A lot of those bees actually come from California. So even if you're ordering them from North Carolina, they've been shipped from California and split in North Carolina, and then they ship you the box in the mail back. So wherever you live, first of all, you're getting bees that have been stressed by being shipped back and forth across the country. Second, they might not be adapted to your specific area.
That brings up a good point. Your local beekeeper association, like everybody knows each other usually, and they can help you out if you have a colony loss here and there. They can probably help you out, but they will also know where to get reputable bees from. And so usually we try to keep bees local. And so for in Georgia, you know, like Georgia is a big bee producer. But like you said, California is a big one. Texas is, I think, is a really big one. So the idea would be try to get it local. But you're absolutely right, because I remember when I was a beekeeper in Massachusetts, up in Boston area, there were actually club members driving down to Georgia from Boston to pick up, you know, the bees, and then everybody could put their order in. And then they were driving with their own car the bees up to Massachusetts. So, but yeah, it is a big industry. That's a lot of moving pieces are involved. And so, yeah, get yourself involved in the local beekeeping culture and association is probably the best that you can do. I always refer to beekeeping. We're farmers. It's just micro livestock. You bring up a great point, and it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, you know, because there is so much enthusiasm in like, oh, I'm gonna have bees in my backyard. I'm gonna have my own honey. I'm gonna create. But a lot of times it's not really well thought through, right? So people think, oh yeah, you know what, I'm gonna have my own honey, and everybody's like, oh, that's a great idea. Now you're gonna be a farmer, so before you do it, make sure that you know before the harvest of the honey, you have to put a lot of sweat equity in it. Like when the nectar flow is happening, you got to open that hive, examine that hive every week, more or less. You got to suppress swarming if you want to have a lot of honey. You want to treat them, they get the diseases. You have to have money that you want to use wisely for treatments. It's goodwill, but a lot of times it fails. And the other thing that a lot of people don't think through is like, let's say you have this hive in your backyard that you're kind of like thinking, you know what, I really don't want to treat it. I'm kind of like want to have my honey without having any kind of medicine in it, or I don't want to treat the bees. I want to be very green. So the problem is that they will get varoa mite infested very quickly, very quickly. So that's just a fact. That varoa mite, and just to give you an idea what a problem it is, if we would have a tick sitting on us, that would be the size of a guinea pig. Imagine a tick basically biting you underneath the ribs or in your armpit, but it's the size of a guinea pig. And then imagine having 2 or 3 of them literally living on you and piercing through your skin and start to eat on your liver or something like this. That's literally what the honeybees are going through with this varoa mite. And then what happens if you don't treat them, if you don't suppress those varoa mites? Because they're going to fly probably in a radius of about 4 miles around the hive. And so in a radius of 4 miles, you're going to have a potentially, your infected bee potentially being a source of pathogens for other bees. And then let's say your colony is weak because of you not treating it. Other bees eventually will figure that out. There's a weak colony, and then they initiate literally a robbery. And this is called robbing. So they're literally, a stronger colony comes in and they say, hey, there's only a couple guard bees on this hive, and I think they're pretty weak. We can actually take all the honey, and that's pretty easy. And so what they do is they go into that enemy hive, and it's like a bank robbery. They're going to take all the honey that they have, fly back home, but while they're collecting the honey, they're also collecting these pathogens. They're getting infected with the bacteria, they're getting potentially infected with the mite, and now they're bringing the mite back home, right? And now you have literally like what I call your ticking time bomb, you know, it's just exploding because you infected maybe 20 other hives. So there's I think a social responsibility to it, and you don't want to have the Typhoid Mary hive in your neighborhood.
So true. Can some of the honeybee diseases be spread to native pollinators?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a lot of research going on. It's highly likely that there is an effect on them. But the big problem that we're facing, and a lot of data is coming out now, is where we have more a problem of competition. Our Western honeybee, which is this most amazing animal, if you considered what they're actually doing on a physiological scale. They're like an army, right? There's kind of like 5 pounds of honeybees every day go out and swarm out, right? 10 or 20,000 bees from one hive go out and pollinate and try to find nectar. And so if you potentially overpopulate a certain areas with bees, which happens in urban areas now, and a lot of data is coming out from bigger cities where people have, a beehive on a balcony, on the rooftop. But as you can imagine, in urbanized centers where most of the surface is concrete, there's very little green space available, right? And so in these situations where the green space is very limited, the native pollinators are just completely outcompeted by the number of honeybees. And so researchers that look into this are seeing already significant effects on native pollinator populations because they just can't keep up with these armies and armies of pollinators that are the Western honeybees. So there's definitely also something worth thinking about. But, if you live out in the countryside, man, keep your bees, So, yeah, absolutely.
It's almost like if you're going to keep bees, you have an obligation to have a green space.
That would be, absolutely, that would be ideal. It would be a farmer that basically just during the day opens their gates and lets the pigs or the chickens, whatever, run through the neighborhood. And it's like, good luck. See where you get your food from. Because in the evening, they'll come home. The more you can provide, obviously, the better it is. So, absolutely. So that goes back to our initial conversations. Like, plant some pollinator plants, plant some wildflowers, plant something stuff where you say, all right, I just released 20,000 bees into the wild. Maybe I should plant a few thousand flowers, right? And suddenly you create this beautiful ecosystem in your backyard. And that's a fabulous thing to do. I always say if 10,000 people say me alone, that makes a difference, right? So yes, if in a city 10,000 people would generate of their lawn 10% in a wild meadow, that would make a huge impact.
So just until very recently, people could give their bees antibiotics without having any medical background whatsoever. That's a scary thought.
Yes, absolutely. You're perfectly right on. A huge problem. More and more bacteria becoming multidrug resistant to those antibiotics. So even though people throw antibiotics into hives, the pathogen, the bacteria laughs at them and keeps growing. You as a veterinarian could be called out to either a backyard beekeeper or a professional, a commercial beekeeper. You would have to inspect a couple frames and obviously feel comfortable coming to the diagnosis of mostly European foulbrood or hopefully not American foulbrood.
The foulbrood, that's a bacterial infection?
That's a bacterial, exactly. That's a bacterial disease. Yes. Melissiococcus is European foulbrood and Penibacillus is American foulbrood. And so both of them can be treated very successfully with tetracyclines. And I think that was probably also the motivation for the FDA to clamp down on these untethered access to antibiotics and throwing it into beehive with potentially honey on there too. It's strictly regulated now. If you put antibiotics on your beehive, there's a withdrawal period depending on antibiotics, but the most commonly used is tetracyclines. So it's like 42 days later, I think, is the withdrawal time where you can start putting honey supers on there. You actually need a very, very small amount of antibiotics per hive. So basically 1 gram of antibiotic powder is actually enough to treat 5 hives. And 1 gram, the amount of powder probably can balance on the nail of my pinky. And that will be enough to treat 5 hives. And yet what I have seen is people literally like drown those girls in the hive with antibiotics. They just throw it in like it's Splenda or something. And there is publications out there which clearly have shown that just the fact of a hive being treated with substances, it really has an impact on them. There's some good evidence out there that the foraging decreases, their normal brood temperature regulation is a little bit thrown off. So you can do a lot of harm with too much antibiotic. And so I think there needs to be an awareness created.
1 gram, like most people probably don't even have a scale that can accurately measure that. So imagine you accidentally 2 grams. That's a 2 times overdose of the medication.
Oh yeah, I've seen overdoses in about like 10 to 20. I mean, where they just literally take the hive and just throw it in. And, with that amount, you could have treated 20 or 30 hives, and they put that amount in one hive.
That reminds me, there was this, I want to say backyard breeder. They were breeding miniature poodles, and they were trying to save money on puppy deworming. So they got some horse dewormer. They had the tube, and they thought, oh, I'll just give a little piece. And their prize poodle ended up with permanent blindness, neurologic problems. Some of the puppies died from ivermectin toxicity just from a measurement mistake like that. It ended up being pretty catastrophic. Take-home points: pollinators are in major danger. Many of them are facing extinction. If you want to help buy organic, don't use pesticides. Plant wild native flowers. Support your local beekeepers. Join your local beekeepers association. Get as much information as you possibly can about the resources and the time that goes into managing 40 to 50,000 living creatures.
You can actively do your part and make things better.